Many people make the mistake of believing that a good conversation is simply a sequence of questions and answers. They think that if they can keep asking interesting questions, they will automatically create attraction, connection, or chemistry. But conversation does not work like an interview. When every few seconds you ask, "Where are you from? What do you do? What do you like? Or what are your hobbies?" the interaction can begin to feel mechanical. You may be trying to show interest, but psychologically, you can accidentally create pressure. A natural conversation has movement. One person says something, the other reacts. One shares an observation, the other adds a thought. A story creates another story. A joke creates laughter. An opinion creates curiosity. There is no need to constantly search for the next question, because the conversation itself is already giving you material. This is where confidence becomes important. When you are insecure, you often believe that silence means failure. The moment there is a pause, you panic and search for another question. You feel responsible for keeping the entire interaction alive. But confident communication does not require constant talking. A brief silence can simply be a moment of reflection. You can smile, observe your surroundings, take a breath, and allow the interaction to develop naturally. Instead of treating a woman as someone you need to impress or extract information from, treat her as another human being whose perspective you genuinely want to experience. If she mentions something interesting, respond to it rather than immediately asking another question. If she tells you she recently started learning something, you might share an experience of your own with learning something difficult. If she makes an unexpected joke, react naturally. If she expresses an opinion, offer your own perspective. This creates a conversation instead of an interrogation. There is also a deeper psychological principle here. People tend to connect more naturally when they feel that they are participating rather than being examined. Constant questioning can unintentionally place one person in the position of interviewer and the other in the position of interviewee. Sharing creates balance. This does not mean you should completely stop asking questions. Questions are valuable when they emerge naturally from genuine curiosity. The problem begins when questions become a strategy for avoiding vulnerability. Some people keep asking questions because they are afraid to reveal anything about themselves. They want the other person to do all the talking because exposing their own personality feels risky. But connection requires reciprocity. If you want someone to share something real, be willing to share something real yourself. Talk about an experience, express an opinion, tell a short story, mention something you genuinely care about. Let another person see the person behind the words. The goal is not to become someone who never asks questions. The goal is to become someone who does not depend on questions to create conversation. Develop your ability to observe, listen, respond, and share. When you stop treating conversation like an examination, you become calmer. When you become calmer, you become more present. And when you become more present, your communication becomes more authentic. The strongest conversational skill is not knowing what to ask next. It is knowing how to participate in the moment. Most people think conversation becomes interesting when you have the right questions. But often the opposite is true. The more you depend on questions, the more you risk turning a natural interaction into an interrogation. Instead of constantly searching for something to ask, learn to observe what is already happening. Observation changes the entire psychology of conversation. When you observe, you stop trying to control the interaction and start responding to reality. You notice the environment, the person's reactions, the emotion behind their words, the small details they mention, and the moments where their energy changes. These details give you natural material to work with. Imagine a woman says, "I had the strangest experience at work today." The inexperienced conversationalist immediately asks, "What happened?" There is nothing inherently wrong with that question. But you can also respond with an observation. You said that with the expression of someone who has completely lost faith in humanity. Now you have created something different. There is personality in the response. There is playfulness. There is room for her to explain, laugh, disagree, or the story. You are not extracting information from her. You are participating in the moment. This is an important psychological distinction. Questions often seek information. Observations create interaction. When you make an observation, you reveal that you are actually paying attention. You aren't simply waiting for your turn to speak. You are responding to what is happening between you. This also requires presence. If your mind is constantly preparing the next question, you aren't really listening. You are rehearsing. And when you rehearse, you miss opportunities. Maybe she makes a subtle joke. Maybe her expression changes when she talks about something she loves. Maybe she becomes unusually passionate about a subject. Maybe something happening around you creates an unexpected opportunity for humor. These moments are invisible to someone who is trapped inside a script. The goal isn't to analyze every movement or turn every detail into some calculated technique. That would create another form of anxiety. The goal is simply to become more attentive. Look, listen, notice, respond. That rhythm is far more natural than question after question. And remember, observation isn't only about her. Observe yourself as well. Notice when you become nervous. Notice when you're talking too quickly. Notice when you're desperately trying to fill silence. Notice when you are saying something because you genuinely mean it and when you are saying something merely to obtain approval. Self-awareness gives you the ability to correct yourself without becoming ashamed of yourself. You don't have to be perfectly smooth. You don't have to eliminate every awkward moment. You simply need to become more conscious. There is also a deeper lesson here. People often believe confidence means knowing exactly what to say. But genuine confidence is often the ability to remain calm when you don't know what to say. You can look around, you can smile, you can make an honest observation, you can allow a pause, you can simply enjoy the moment. Nothing terrible happens. The person sitting across from you is not an examination committee. She is another human being experiencing the same uncertain moment. Once you understand this, you stop treating conversation as something you must win. You start treating it as something you experience. And that shift from performance to presence is where real social confidence begins. So stop searching desperately for the next question. Pay attention to what is already happening. Because when you become observant, the world around you becomes your conversation. And when you are truly present, you will discover that you rarely need a script. One of the most overlooked signs of confidence is the ability to remain comfortable when nothing is being said. Many people fear silence because they interpret it as failure. The moment a conversation becomes quiet, they immediately search for another question, another joke, or another subject. Their mind begins racing. What should I say now? But this urgency often creates the very awkwardness they are trying to escape. Silence itself is not uncomfortable. What makes silence uncomfortable is the meaning we attach to it. If you believe every second must be filled with words, then a pause feels like rejection. You begin judging yourself. You wonder whether the other person is losing interest or whether you have said something wrong. But if you understand that conversations naturally breathe, silence becomes something completely different. It becomes space. Think about music. If every moment contained sound, there would be no rhythm. The pauses make the music meaningful. Conversation works in much the same way. A pause allows people to process what has been said, observe one another, and decide where the interaction naturally goes next. This is particularly important when talking to women. If you become obsessed with keeping the conversation alive at every second, you may unintentionally communicate nervousness. You are not listening because you are already preparing your next sentence. You are not experiencing the moment because you are trying to control it. Real confidence is quieter. It says, I don't need to rush. It says, I don't need to prove myself. It says, a moment of silence does not threaten my worth. This doesn't mean you should deliberately create awkward silences or act distant to appear mysterious. That is simply another form of performance. The goal is not to manufacture silence. The goal is to stop being afraid of it. If there is a natural pause, let it exist. Take a breath, smile, look around, think, then speak when you genuinely have something to say. You may discover that your conversations become more meaningful because you are no longer speaking merely to eliminate discomfort. There is another psychological benefit to this. When you become comfortable with silence, you become more comfortable with uncertainty. And uncertainty is everywhere in human relationships. You cannot know exactly what another person thinks. You cannot predict every reaction. You cannot guarantee attraction. You cannot control whether someone will continue talking to you. Trying to eliminate all uncertainty is exhausting. Emotional maturity comes from learning to exist peacefully within it. This is why self-mastery matters more than conversational tricks. The goal is not to become someone who always knows what to say. The goal is to become someone who doesn't panic when there is nothing to say. A confident person can enjoy a conversation, but they can also allow it to end. They can experience a pause without desperately filling it. They can hear a short answer without immediately assuming something is wrong. They can accept that sometimes two people simply do not have chemistry. That acceptance creates freedom, and freedom changes the way you communicate. You become less concerned with performing and more interested in connecting. You listen more carefully. You notice subtle expressions. You become aware of tone and emotion. You stop treating every pause as an emergency. The deepest lesson is simple. You do not have to control every moment to have a good interaction. Let the conversation breathe. Let the other person think. Let yourself think. And let reality unfold without forcing it. When you can sit comfortably in silence, you demonstrate something far more powerful than a clever line. You demonstrate that your sense of worth does not depend on constant external validation. That is the foundation of genuine confidence. Think about what happens when two people meet and one person immediately starts asking question after question. Where are you from? What do you do? What do you like? What are your hobbies? On the surface, this may appear to be good conversation, but psychologically, it can create an imbalance. One person becomes the interviewer, while the other becomes the person being interviewed. Eventually, the interaction begins to feel like an information exchange rather than a genuine human connection. A more natural approach is to understand the principle of reciprocity. If you want someone to open up, you should also be willing to reveal something about yourself. Instead of constantly asking someone to give you information, contribute something of your own. Share a short story, mention an unusual experience, express an honest opinion. Make an observation about the situation around you. Give the other person something they can react to. For example, instead of asking, "Do you like traveling?" you might say, "I recently realized that I enjoy traveling more when I don't have every minute planned." The unexpected parts usually become the best memories. Now the conversation has somewhere to go. She can agree, disagree, share her own experience, or explain how she sees travel. You haven't demanded an answer. You have opened a door. This distinction is important because people often connect through emotional resonance rather than through raw information. Facts tell you what someone does. Stories reveal how someone experiences life. Opinions reveal how someone thinks. Experiences reveal what has shaped them. The goal is not to reveal your entire life immediately. Self-disclosure should be natural and appropriate to the level of familiarity between two people. You don't need to tell someone your deepest secrets simply to appear authentic. Healthy openness develops gradually. You offer something genuine, observe the response, and allow trust to develop naturally. There is also an important psychological benefit for you. When you stop depending on questions, you become less anxious about keeping the conversation alive. You realize that you don't have to constantly produce another question. You can contribute. You can respond. You can allow a pause. You can let the other person take some responsibility for the conversation. This creates balance, and balance creates comfort. The deeper lesson is that confident communication is not about extracting attention from another person. It is about creating a space where both people can participate freely. If you constantly ask questions because you are afraid of silence, you may unknowingly communicate nervousness. But when you can share something about yourself and calmly wait for the other person to respond, you demonstrate that you are comfortable with yourself. Remember, you are not conducting an interview. You are building an exchange. Give something before expecting something. Share before demanding. Reveal a little before asking someone else to reveal more. When both people contribute, conversation becomes less like an interrogation and more like two minds meeting in the same moment. That is where genuine connection begins. There is a skill far more powerful than knowing the perfect words to say: the ability to understand what is happening emotionally in a conversation. This is emotional intelligence. It is the difference between merely speaking and actually connecting. Many people approach conversation as if success depends on having impressive lines, clever jokes, or perfectly timed questions. But human beings do not experience communication only through words. They notice tone, facial expressions, pauses, energy, enthusiasm, discomfort, and sincerity. A person can say all the right words while communicating insecurity underneath them. Another person can say something simple while creating a feeling of comfort because they are genuinely present. This is why emotional intelligence matters more than clever lines. When you speak with a woman, don't become obsessed with whether your sentence was impressive. Pay attention to how the interaction is unfolding. Is she engaged in the conversation? Is she contributing naturally? Does she seem relaxed? Is she giving short answers because she is distracted or because she simply doesn't want to continue? You don't need to become an expert at reading minds. You simply need to stop assuming that every interaction must move in the direction you want. This is a form of psychological maturity. A confident person understands that interest cannot be manufactured through pressure. If someone is enthusiastic, allow the conversation to develop. If someone seems uncomfortable or uninterested, respect that signal. You don't need to chase, convince, or prove yourself. The same principle applies to listening. Most people listen while preparing their next response. They hear the words, but their mind is already searching for something impressive to say. Genuine listening is different. You allow the other person to finish. You notice what excites them. You notice what makes them thoughtful. You respond to what they actually said instead of forcing the conversation toward your prepared topic. This creates something rare, psychological safety. People generally feel more comfortable around someone who isn't constantly trying to control the interaction. When you listen without judgment, you create room for authenticity. And when you share your own thoughts honestly, you give the other person permission to be authentic as well. But emotional intelligence also means understanding yourself. Notice what happens inside you when you feel ignored, rejected, or uncertain. Does your confidence suddenly disappear? Do you start talking faster? Do you become overly agreeable? Do you desperately search for another topic? These reactions reveal areas where self-mastery is needed. The goal isn't to eliminate every nervous feeling. The goal is to remain capable of choosing your behavior despite those feelings. You can feel nervous and still speak calmly. You can feel attracted and still maintain your dignity. You can experience rejection and still remain respectful. You can enjoy someone's attention without becoming dependent upon it. That is real confidence. So forget the obsession with clever lines. Become observant instead. Become a better listener. Become more aware of your own emotions and the emotional signals around you. Speak honestly. Respect boundaries. Let conversations develop naturally. Because the strongest communicator isn't the person who knows exactly what to say at every moment. It is the person who understands when to speak, when to listen, when to share, when to pause, and when to simply let the moment be. That is emotional intelligence. And when you develop it, you don't just become better at talking to women, you become better at understanding people, and ultimately yourself. There is a profound difference between genuine curiosity and the desperate need for validation. On the surface, they can look almost identical. Both may involve paying attention, listening carefully, and showing interest in another person. But psychologically, they come from completely different places. Genuine curiosity comes from abundance. I am comfortable with myself, and I would like to understand you. Validation seeking comes from insecurity. I need you to like me because your reaction will determine how I feel about myself. This distinction becomes especially important in conversations with women. When a man becomes overly concerned with whether she is impressed, attracted, or interested, he can unconsciously transform the interaction into a performance. Every response becomes a test. If she laughs, he feels successful. If she becomes quiet, he becomes anxious. If she disagrees, he immediately tries to recover. Instead of experiencing the conversation, he is constantly evaluating his own performance. That creates pressure, and pressure makes people unnatural. Real confidence begins when you stop treating another person's reaction as a measurement of your worth. You can be interested in someone without needing their approval. You can enjoy their attention without becoming dependent upon it. You can find someone attractive while remaining emotionally grounded. This is why genuine curiosity is so powerful. It allows you to listen without secretly waiting for an opportunity to impress. You don't need to turn every statement into another question. You can respond with your own thoughts, share an experience, make an observation, or simply allow the conversation to develop naturally. For example, if she tells you about something she is passionate about, you don't have to immediately ask another question simply to keep her talking. You can say what you genuinely think about the subject. You might connect it to something from your own experience. You might disagree respectfully. You might even admit that you know very little about it. The objective is not to extract more information. The objective is to create a genuine exchange. This principle extends beyond dating. People generally respond better to someone who is comfortable enough to be authentic rather than someone desperately trying to gain approval. The irony is that the more desperately you try to be liked, the less naturally you communicate. But when you stop needing to be liked, your personality has room to breathe. You become willing to express opinions. You become willing to laugh at yourself. You become willing to accept disagreement. You become willing to walk away from an interaction that isn't mutual. That is self-mastery. Never confuse confidence with believing that everyone will want you. Confidence is knowing that you will remain emotionally stable whether they do or not. Your goal should not be to manipulate someone's emotions or manufacture attraction. Your goal should be to become someone who can communicate honestly, listen deeply, respect boundaries, and remain grounded regardless of the outcome. When you approach conversation from that position, you no longer need to chase validation. You simply become curious, and curiosity creates freedom.